partnerships at every market segment from government, enterprise, commercial down to consumer. So real pleasure being here facilitating this with Robert and Fitzo.
Yeah, so if we look at what we're talking about today, we're going to split this workshop into three different panels. The first panel in a second, I'll be moderating, looking at what's happening in Singapore. Then move on, similar panel, but looking at what's happening in Australia. And everywhere you go, you see different approaches being taken to address the same problem. And then we'll end up with looking at the tech model and how technology is helping. I think just to start, I think one thing I notice wherever I go in the world, the scammers always come up with clever ways to beat the tactics that everybody's trying to put in to prevent scams. And I know that, for example, in Singapore, quite recently, a very drastic and comprehensive measure was put in place, for example, to be able to allow the police to recommend that customers' accounts are blocked if there's suspicion of scams. It's quite a sort of revolutionary process, doesn't happen in many other countries, but even then, the scammers find a way to get round it. So I have a home in Sembawang. Last weekend, I was sitting on a bench in Sembawang, and at the same time, I read an article about a lady who'd been scammed and actually handed over 250,000 Singapore dollars in cash to a scammer. Even though her accounts have been blocked, she still managed to find a way, or the scammers have still managed to find a way to get the funds and obviously, make another victim. What's even more, I guess, chilling in that story is that the person she actually handed the cash over to was also somebody who'd been scammed. So even with the strictest prevention measures, the scammers are still finding ways to bypass it. So that was, to me, was a very telling story when I look at what happens elsewhere. So as I say, we're going to go through the three different approaches to this and understand what's being done in each of those. There may be time for Q&A, but we're already overrunning a little bit, so...
Yeah, we're a bit tight, yes.
Yeah, we're a bit tight.
So,
yeah.
Let's go straight into the Singapore one.
Yeah, so over to Singapore. So I'd just like to introduce the panel here. So maybe everybody can just introduce themselves. So I'm from Fizai. Yes, Aaron? Hello, afternoon. Hello, afternoon. Is that... can we switch the mics on, please?
Okay, hi. Afternoon, guys. Arun here from UOB. So I'm the fraud program, managing the fraud program in UOB, which entails building all the capabilities, tech capabilities for fraud, card side, CASA side across the region. And of course, because to shape the direction of the industry conversation, I'm also involved in all the industry panels and discussions.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alvin Loh. I'm with the OCBC Group Financial Crime Compliance Anti-Fraud team. In my current role, I do anti-scam advisory, anti-fraud advisory. I also do incident management, and I'm also involved in a lot of the industry initiatives and industry projects. There are a lot of them. I think my fellow panelists can attest to that. I've been heavily involved in the GASS Singapore chapter since its inception about 2 years ago, so I'm really glad to be here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gavin. I head fraud operations for Standard Chartered Bank in Singapore. Like my colleagues here, I'm also very closely involved in all the industry initiatives in Singapore with MAS, SPF, and also the other banks. I cover all fraud types, so not just CASA, payment fraud, also money mules, and third-party and first-party fraud lending risk. So glad to be here and happy to share my learnings over the last few months.
Okay, thank you. So as I say, Singapore has made quite a few measures recently to address the threat from scams, both in financial services and telcos. One of those, obviously, was last year, 2024, introduced the shared responsibility framework, which represented a big shift, I think, in the battle against fighting scams, but specifically phishing scams. It helped remove some of the burden that was being put directly onto consumers and put into approach a waterfall methodology, where, first of all, banks were looked at in terms of their prevention measures and then going through to the telcos. So there's been obviously a lot of success around that, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about now in the panel and understand, where that has got to and then where does the future look like going. So number of questions, so maybe I can turn to you first, Gavin, and just ask you, when you looked at the shared responsibility framework, how did you go about approaching and implementing those new ways of working? And what were some of the challenges maybe you faced in doing so?
Yeah, so the shared responsibility framework is quite comprehensive, quite detailed, and it actually speaks to our fraud life cycle across prevention, detection, response, and reporting. So when we looked at the shared responsibility framework, it wasn't, what do we need to do? But it was more like, how can we embed this across our entire fraud life cycle? So it wasn't just a bolt-on solution or a tick box exercise. It was more comprehensive to see how we can embed it. So for example, one of the things was kill switch. It wasn't just a tech enablement to just let the client do kill switch, but it was also important to educate the client. So it covered client awareness. It wasn't just about the client being able to put the kill switch on, but if they face problems, who can they call? Who can help them to put the kill switch or do the kill switch themselves? If they need to remove the kill switch, how do we do that? So it was a matter of making sure that speaking to the SRF is also putting in operational frameworks to respond to it. And therein obviously is a challenge because different systems, where do we actually put the kill switch on? Which is the best place to put it? It's not a decision that we can take lightly. So a lot of deliberations, a lot of discussions across the organization, which I think was one of the key challenges that we faced, is how do we actually implement the SRF in a right way that we can operationally manage it easily. There's obviously the human capital, getting the right people to come in and do the coding. And time is of the essence. It's the most valuable resource for us, right? So we had a deadline to achieve the SRF, and managing that against the entire backdrop of what the bank wants to do, not just in Singapore, but across the group, was, I would say, one of the other big challenges, right? Aligning everything. So yeah, it was a journey, but I think we're almost there. Few bits and bobs to be done, but yeah, it's been good so far.
Okay, good. Arun, anything to add to that?
Yeah, to add on to what Gavin said, things like kill switch, real-time notifications, I think we have been doing it for a few years now, since 2022 or 2023. So I think customers were more or less used to it. One of the new thing under the shared responsibility framework was this sort of cooling period for high risky transaction, or when there's a drastic drain of the account through a phishing attack or something, and where you're supposed to hold the transaction, let it cool down, and then auto release or whatever it is. So that's relatively new, especially for UOB. And one of the hardest thing then to manage is customer expectation, right? Because when we get in calls from customers, it's always like, it's my money, I'm sending it to my own account in another bank. Why are you holding it, right? Or I need this money for an urgent need. Why can't you let it go? So I think what really helped us is the consistent nature of how shared responsibility framework was implemented across all the banks in Singapore, right? And also the consistent communication that went along, right? Supported by ABS, the Bank Association of Banks of Singapore, and led by MAS, right? So that really helps us set the expectation, manages customer expectation. Not everyone is happy, when we hold their funds, but we do get words of appreciation from customers who see the value in what we are doing, and the bank and the MAS and the regulators are doing. Yep.
Okay. Thanks very much. I think what we're seeing there, obviously, as we all know, it's a balancing act, getting the expectations of the customer right with actually, preventing harm that may come their way. I think we can also see that there's a lot of operational implications. It's not just about consumer education. It's not just about the technology. There's a number of different factors that need to be combined into this. And then we know that obviously the shared responsibility framework was devised specifically to address phishing scams. But Alvin, if I can turn to you, and maybe you can explain some of those investments, some of those changes you put into your operations, how you could then use that for other types of scam, such as investment or malware or other things like that.
Thanks for the question, Robert. While the SRF focuses only on phishing scam, OCBC and the other banks have always been building anti-scam measures that protects our customers against all types of scams. In fact, for me, my preference has always been for typology agnostic measures, which essentially means that these scam measures cover across multiple scam types. We must acknowledge that scam types and scam MOs are always evolving. We don't want to play this endless cat and mouse game with the scammers. we want to try to build typology agnostic measures. And one such measure that OCBC has built is OCBC Money Lock. What OCBC Money Lock allows our customers to lock up their excess funds in their bank accounts, and these funds cannot be digitally transferred. What this means is that for them to unlock the funds, they have to go down to a physical location such as an OCBC branch or OCBC ATM to unlock these funds. So as we can clearly see how this will be very effective against unauthorized scams such as phishing scams or malware scams, but the added friction also helps for authorized scams or self-effected scams or authorized push payment scams, depending on which country you're from, various terminologies there. The added friction, the need to actually go down to a physical location to unlock the funds, actually serves as a cognitive break to the customer. It affords them the time to think once, think twice, and hopefully think another time before they actually perform the transaction to the scammer. But with that said, we also do acknowledge that certain scam situations require a more targeted, a more measured approach. So one example I'll give was in 2023, when Singapore was hit by a very bad wave of malware scams. So in 2023, scammers had abused Android accessibility permissions to be able to remotely control victims' devices. So you can imagine how easy it was for the scammers to control a device, tap into the banking app, and siphon away all the customers' funds. So for that, OCBC, together with the rest of the banking industry, we actually rolled out really strong anti-malware measures against these specific modus operandi. What we did was we actually detected the risky accessibility permissions granted to suspicious side-loaded third-party apps on their Android devices. And if we detect such a permission granted, we will actually prevent the banking session from continuing. So scammers will not be able to siphon away the money. So in a nutshell, I think apart from what is prescribed to us in frameworks, OCBC and the banking sector has always been implementing various anti-scam measures to protect all our customers against all types of scams. It's about understanding the scam environment and reacting with the right measures.
Thank you, Alvin. Gavin, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Alvin said. It's very difficult to, we can't just take a pointed approach and just try to fix one problem when we know the scammers are going to move to another typology. So the important thing is to have a solution that is more holistic. So for example, like Alvin said, for malware, we've got our hardening that actually prevents, for example, screen sharing, which was one of the typologies that we saw, right? Apart from the other sharing that you can do on the Android device, which is more susceptible. The cooling off period, again, is a big cognitive break, like Alvin said, again, not just for unauthorized, but also for authorized. It puts some time between the victims actually transferring money. So I think even from an industry perspective, when we work together, we don't look at our solutions being just targeted at, for example, phishing. We look to see how we can make it more holistic and how as an industry we can work together to come up with better solutions for our clients.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's very interesting, right? So their process is put in place, you know, on the surface initially to address scams, but equally being able to be applied in other fraud scenarios, unauthorized fraud. Also something that obviously we're not talking directly about today at GASS, but also a very severe threat to people. It's also helping protect them from those attacks when maybe their identity gets taken over or their device gets hacked. So very interesting to see how these are sort of indirect benefits as well in other types of fraud prevention. So I think we've already touched, I think all of you have touched on the fact that there's a bit of a tricky balancing act between introducing new technologies and new processes. What are some of the considerations and how do you go about that process to make sure that you get the right balance between seamless customer experience, but also preventing and maybe preventing them from harm, really? How did you sort of weigh up that balance? Yeah, maybe Arun, I can turn to you first.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a balancing act that we have to do. So when Stephen Leong is our head of fraud operations in UOB, so when he and his team puts in fraud detection rules and scenarios, I think something that we always do as a hygiene is, backtesting, A/B, champion challenger testing, where we know the effectiveness of the rule and the detection and the customer impact, right? False positive detection rate and things like that. So that ensures that the rules are, scenarios are, the friction that we are adding are effective, right? Without causing too much customer impact. A/B testing is something that I think that's another potential valuable thing that we can do, but we are not there yet. It's something that we want to do, right? Now, there are certain scenarios where, especially with emerging fraud, right, which is really when the losses have already accelerated, like Gavin said, when there is malware attack, right, there is no, we can't take a wait and test approach, right? We have to implement that control immediately. So, like I said previously, the only thing that helps us, the thing that helps us is consistent communication before we implement that across the industry, and consistent implementation across all banks. Because it's no use that one bank implements it and then, the scammers just move to victimize other banks' customers, right? So again, implementing it consistently, communicating it together with ABS, with MAS in a consistent way, I think that has really managed the customer expectation, and customers are really appreciative of that.
Gavin?
Yeah, maybe what I'll add on top of that is, the balancing act is a journey, right? If we can't do it once and then think we've got it right, it evolves over a period of time. And so we always got to constantly calibrate, whether it is our detection rates, fall FPR, changes that we are doing that directly impact the customer. So I think apart from the customer education that Arun mentioned is really, really important. And we always do that as an industry along with ABS and MAS to make sure that clients are aware of what is happening and they understand why we are doing this, right? Cooling off measures, not able to do a transaction for 12 hours, transaction on hold for 12 hours is quite detrimental. But I think if the clients understand why we are doing it, it does help. The other thing is to be a little more focused. So high-risk transactions, deterrents are good. Making it more difficult is good. But at the same time, we need to ensure that low-risk transactions have a smoother journey. Yeah? And also try to be a little more focused. So one thing that we did, for example, in Standard Chartered very recently is put in payment warnings as a cognitive break. And what we try to do is target it towards a certain segment. For example, the elderly or the vulnerable. So it's not everyone who keeps getting payment warnings and it leads to a fatigue, but we target at the right place, to the right client segment and persona. I think that's the most important thing when we, as fraud risk managers, that we look to target the right personas that are vulnerable rather than, putting a blanket approach, which I think will help.
Yeah, and I think you've also all highlighted the fact that, it's not just the fact that somebody's been scammed. And we looked at some research from a couple of years ago, and people almost expect they're going to be scammed. What really turns them, towards their bank and builds up that trust and loyalty is not the fact they've been scammed, but it's how the bank will react when that event happens. And I think that's coming out in the learnings here, that if you can explain why decisions are made, then you actually have a good opportunity to build a really lasting relationship with your customers. So I think that's really good, that the fact that you're having that difficult decision, you can never get it right all the time, right? But at least you understand the challenges involved in that. So when we think about, maybe let's move on to talk about intelligence sharing, and what would you say has been some of the most effective things that have happened in Singapore recently in terms of data sharing and working together, maybe sort of within the banking industry, but maybe even beyond with other sectors? Alvin, maybe you can start with that.
Thanks, Robert. So for OCBC, I think one of the most effective information sharing channels is with the Singapore Police Force. So OCBC does have a 24/7 anti-scam unit, which is actually co-located with the Singapore Police Force Anti-Scam Center. That's right, same building, same office, same floor. So in terms of information and intelligence sharing, we can see how rapid and how swift it can be. So I think this information sharing exchange we have built with the Singapore Police Force has been pivotal in the fight against scams. So I think we can imagine a scenario, and we have numerous cases similar to this, where a customer walks into an OCBC bank branch, they might exhibit certain red flags that they might be a scam victim. They might be a bit flustered. They might be constantly checking their mobile devices, or maybe give incoherent responses to when our branch staff probe them further about the transactions. So our vigilant branch staff can actually escalate this matter to our OCBC anti-scam unit, who is seated next to with the Singapore Police Force, and together with the Singapore Police Force, they can make an assessment as to whether this is likely a scam victim or not. If the assessment is that this is likely to be a scam victim, the police force can actually choose to intervene. Basically, they can reach out to the customer, they can call the customer, or what we see that is very effective is if they present themselves, they knock on the customer's door wearing their full police uniform. And once the customer sees a police officer, actual police officer talking to them, they are actually awakened from the deep level of social engineering. So this is a really effective channel. Maybe I can quickly touch on a second channel that we find really effective, and that is the channel we have amongst us banks. While banks are limited in the type of information we can share amongst one another, we are able to share information about scam typologies, emerging and ongoing scam threats. So the 7 major banks in Singapore are all members of this Standing Committee on Fraud under the Association of Banks of Singapore. So, and under this committee, we are, all 3 panelists you see here today are members of the Anti-Scam Operational Task Force. What we do is we meet routinely to share about scam trends. And the beauty of having 7 major banks involved in this is the fact that the banks all have head offices and subsidiaries around the world. So we are not only limited to what is happening around Singapore, we actually have a visibility of the type of scams occurring around the world. And that only helps us build our defenses in case the scammers pivot from one country to the next. So in a nutshell, I find these 2 information sharing channels very valuable for OCBC.
Thank you, Arvin. Arun, you're part of this initiative as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think, so Alvin has covered the 2 key sharing network that we have, right? The Anti-Scam Center and the Standing Committee on Fraud. I think, again, the Standing Committee on Fraud, like Alvin shared, right? We do share trends, but we also have a thorough discussion on the controls that can be put against these scams, right? We really debate whether they are going to be effective, or, is it going to be, having a lot of false positive, inconveniencing a lot of customers without, having the uplift. So some of the discussions are quite, can get heated during those discussions, but I think it is important to thoroughly debate. I think, but the other thing that we do is that when a decision has to be made, it's made quickly, right? And then, it's a consistent implementation across. So that has really helped.
Okay, thanks very much. So I think it's really interesting. I think there's some lessons we can learn here, right? There is the sort of the actual sort of organizational process with the Scam Command, and I know that Singapore Scam Command model is something that's being looked at by many other countries globally, a lesson to learn from. But I think there's also a lesson there, and what we've learned is about how actually you don't have to wait for these big regulations or big things to happen. Actually, banks on the ground can mobilize and activate themselves and actually get a lot of effective benefit from rather simple, informal measures. But again, obviously in strict compliance with regulation and rules. So I think there's some good stories there about what's been achieved in Singapore. And I guess, obviously, as a technology provider, it would be amiss of me not to ask you about AI and technology and how that plays a role. So maybe, Gavin, you could kick us off by just explaining how, maybe artificial intelligence, machine learning has been introduced and how that's helping you in your prevention model.
So yeah, like everyone else, I guess, Standard Chartered also wants to use AI to the best that we can. We have, I think the most mature area that we have in AI machine learning today is on our card fraud space. So we work with FICO, and their Falcon solution is really good. We are seeing really good results, and it's been quite mature. The other areas that we are working on with a couple of vendors is on behavioral biometrics. We are also working on a scam model. And we're also working on a money mules model. So we've got varying degrees of success with these models. Over the last few years, I think the money mules model that I've seen in the last few months actually is giving us some really good results, which is actually really good. But it's been difficult, right? Partially because the human capital, the knowledge to build these models takes time. We didn't get in, I think, on day one. The maturity of the models to detect the changing scam typologies, retraining the model is also quite a big overhead. And I think most importantly, the scalability of the solution, right? We've got so many data sources, so many systems. Being able to detect real time and give a decision in milliseconds, I think, is where sometimes our models are not quick enough. And I guess the most important thing, like Robert, like you mentioned, is can we explain what the models are saying? Do we know why the model has made this decision, right? Not just for us, but also for us to tell our customers, right? So all in all, yeah, AI machine learning, I think, is an amazing tool that, it's a journey. I don't think we are there yet, and we'll improve as we go on. But the proof, really, the main thing is to ensure that we make the models trustworthy. We make them explainable and be able to scale them for our network and our clients.
Thank you, Gavin. Alvin?
Sure. Maybe I'll cover briefly about two machine learning models that OCBC uses for our fraud surveillance. The first we have is a victim vulnerability model. So that hopes to identify individuals who might be more susceptible to scam. The second machine learning model we have is a transaction scoring model. Using multiple data points, we try to score every transaction that happens in the bank, most transactions that happen in the bank, to determine whether it's likely to be a suspicious transaction or not. And maybe I'll cover a little bit about the challenges. I think in the grand scheme of things, scam transactions only make up a small percentage of the millions of transactions that a bank processes every day. And we all know in machine learning, right, where sample size is really important. So the sample sizes do start off small. But with that said, we have found these machine learning models to be very effective in actually reducing the amount of false positives and as such, reducing the amount of friction to genuine customers. But yeah, as with all machine learning models, it only gets better and better with time as more and more data is ingested into the system.
Thanks very much. I think just a comment from me there. I think we hear a lot about explainability, obviously, when it comes to AI and machine learning. Sometimes that's always sort of thinking in the eyes of the regulator. Can we make sure we can explain to the regulator? But here again, real example about how that's important as well in order to establish the trust with your customer. The better you can explain why your decisions are made, the better your relationship will grow with your customer. So explainability from the end user perspective is sometimes something that's forgotten, but I guess equally, if not more important. Just conscious of time, so very quickly, we just need to wrap up with the final question. Obviously, shared responsibility framework we can see is not, although literally focused on phishing, it has other implications. It's also changed how you do your processes. What do you see as coming up in the future? So based in terms of what you maybe envisage is coming, or maybe something you'd actually like to see in terms of future advancement? Alvin, maybe.
Sure. Thanks, Robert. So for me, I think we should continue to adopt a whole of ecosystem approach in this fight against scams. So I think, and this is really what GASS is about, isn't it? Right? Bringing organizations from different sectors together in this fight. If we think of a scam chain, a typical scam chain, it might start off on a social media with a social media advertisement. The conversation with the scammer then moves on to a messaging platform. Thereafter, the victim might transact using maybe a traditional banking channel, or they might even use an e-wallet to make the transaction. And thereafter, again, the funds might flow through a crypto exchange. What we see here is so many different parties across this scam chain, and every single one of these parties has benefited in some way or some form from the digital ecosystem. So it is my view that any company that benefits from this digital ecosystem should play a proportional role in its protection. It cannot fall solely on the government, it cannot fall solely on law enforcement, and it cannot fall solely on a single sector or industry. Rather, we really need a whole of ecosystem approach, a whole of government approach, and a whole of society approach to combat and to win the battle over this scourge.
Arun.
Yeah, so as Alvin mentioned, I think the whole of industry approach, right, is really important, and I think Singapore is a good example where multiple players from telcos to banks to regulators to enforcement agencies have all come and tried to play their part. I think it can only get better, even more intensive from here, right? The leadership of MAS, I think that's also something that has been great, because again, things are discussed thoroughly, right? But when it comes time to implement, I think the decisions are made quickly, and then it's a consistent implementation. Personally, what I would like to see is that I think from banks today, we all have our own fraud, AI-driven, using AI fraud detection solutions. I think an industry-level solution which will involve secure real-time data sharing may add value to this, right? So that we can in real-time share the data across, right? Regional collaboration, right? Again, I think our data is something like within 30 minutes, funds leave Singapore, right? So a regional real-time data sharing, again, there are certain things that has to be hurdled, that has to be crossed, like regulations and privacy and things like that. But a regional sharing of data in much more real time would also help this whole initiative. Right? Yeah.
Thanks very much. I think so. We see some real ambition there, and I know that collaboration is a word that's very readily used, and especially at GASS, we talk about it. And maybe some of us are frustrated in the fact that it's often just words. But I think if we just look carefully, right? So in Singapore, leading the way in terms of in terms of timing, introducing some of the first controls, actually combining two industry sectors, right? No mean feat when it's led by MAS, right? Then how do you get the telcos involved? If we look at some of the other countries in the world that are just starting to introduce regulation, Canada, Mexico, they're getting to some of the stages where they're actually introducing the other sectors as well. So people are learning, people are listening, and there is hope, as I say, when the next stage of the responsibility framework comes in, it may be a wider scope, other industry sectors. So big tech will be in the mix. I think everybody can recognize that, the importance. So thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much. I think some good information there about Singapore. We'll hop down. We'll do a quick seat changeover and get Australia up here. Imran.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Imran from Trend Micro. It gives me great pleasure to moderate this next panel on protecting people from scams with learnings from Australia. Now, many of you in this room are deeply familiar with the scale of the scam problem. What makes this next panel discussion, similar to the one before that Robert moderated, is that we'll be focusing on what's working, specifically how Australia has taken the world first step in legislating a scam prevention framework. Legislation that imposes enforceable ecosystem-wide responsibilities on banks, telcos, and digital platforms. We'll unpack what this framework looks like in practice, what's been achieved so far, and what lessons can be applied elsewhere. And we'll also explore how technology and industry collaboration fit into the puzzle on protecting Australians from scams. So please join me in welcoming our three incredible experts for this discussion, in no particular order. From AusPayNet, the head of economic crime, Toby Evans, who leads efforts to tackle financial crime across Australia's payment systems. Welcome, Toby. From the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the General Manager for the National Anti-Scam Centre, Jade Richmond, who has been at the forefront of designing and coordinating scam prevention initiatives nationally. Welcome, Jade. And from Feed's Eye Australia, the head of product ecosystem, Mark Hookey, whose organisation works closely with banks and payment providers worldwide, bringing AI and advanced technology into the fight against scams. Welcome, Mark. Thank you all for being here. So let's start broad as an opening to all of you. Australia's scam prevention framework is being called a world first. From each of your perspectives, payments, regulation and technology, why is it such a significant development?
I'll start. Are we working? Yep. Yeah, so for us, since this became a problem, I guess since we became so good at identifying and mitigating fraud, and the scams problem arose in 2018, we looked towards Singapore for learnings, and we also looked to the UK. And for our approach to the scam prevention framework, it was a clear decision to see the noble intentions of the UK and how well-intentioned it was, but also what the unintended consequences were. So for the UK model, it regulated one sector alone, and that was the banking and payments sector. And they did a lot of good work where, from what we can see, they're identifying 60, 70% of most scams as we are in that sector. But from the latest data, scams are only down 2% in terms of value. Investment scams, which we all know are those high value scams, up 34%. And when we look at why, I guess, it wasn't as effective as they hoped for and what we could learn from that, it was because criminals do not identify and social engineer their victims on banking platforms, as identified in the last panel very well. And so we need to stop scams as close to the source as possible. And as the last panel said, that includes telcos and digital platforms and others, which are those enablers. So that's the path we've gone down. The legislation has passed. We're being quite humble about it, where it is going to be a very difficult piece of public policy to roll out in terms of the rules and the associated codes. That is important because, again, learning from the UK model, they said it incentivises banks and payments industry to do more, but what is more? And so that's what we need to figure out. And of course, it's really important that as we meet our global peers, that we share what works, but we also share what doesn't. And so you can learn from us as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, just checking that works. Yep. Look, I think from an Australian perspective, particularly from the, I guess, the regulator that I sit within, it really is unique in Australia in the sense that we have, in a more structured way, moved from the individual being the one responsible to be vigilant and the individual and the citizen holding most of the risk. So essentially now we are looking at the systems and industry and regulators and other parts of that whole ecosystem to come together to provide that protection for against scams. And I think Australia really has adopted a model that does take into account all parts of that ecosystem. And I think the framework itself provides a mechanism to really uplift in a consistent way. What we found in the early days, particularly with the National Anti-Scam Centre, is there was a very fragmented approach, so across the ecosystem, with some really good examples of initiatives that will work with, one telecommunications company or a couple of banks. But in order to get that systemic uplift, taking this regulatory approach and putting in place a framework is really going to help us get there. I think the other thing I'd say is that in Australia, we have really embraced that idea of collaboration, and everybody, as we've said, talks about that. But I think what we've done is we've put in place the governance and the structures that you need to do that well, particularly when you look at government and law enforcement and industry trying to work together. So we knew before that there were particularly barriers. Organisations may not feel comfortable because of competition laws getting together and working together. And we also know that sometimes, law enforcement or regulators being in the room with industry can be really problematic. So through the National Anti-Scam Centre in Australia, we were able to put together a framework and a governance model that essentially supported safe ways of doing that. And I think if you want to collaborate properly, you need to build trust. And our fusion cells, which we've heard about this morning from Kathy, really show that if you put in place a good framework and you build that trust with all of the different participants, that you will get some real outcomes. And I think what I would say to others looking at the sort of model we have in Australia is to put that time and effort in how you set it up, in being very transparent about the kind of rules of the game if people are coming together to work together. The other thing I think in Australia is that we have taken on board some of the initiatives and some of the things that have been tested in other countries, but then again provided the framework and the ability for organisations to get together and really test things at a small scale so that the things that work can be scaled up. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. Mark. Working?
Hello.
Here we are.
Thank you. Australia has a long history of strong consumer protection regulation. I think this is another step in that direction. And Australians talk about the pub test. The average man or woman talking about, with the benefit of hindsight, is it okay that this telco allowed this message to continue to get transmitted, or this social media company allowed an advertisement to proceed, or a bank allowed a payment to move money? And in a certain circumstance, with the benefit of hindsight, is that okay? If it's not okay, then let's impose a severe penalty on the institution that facilitated it. I thought Alvin from OCBC put it well. Through the scam chain, there are beneficiaries across many, many industries. And so there should be commensurate responsibilities and penalties if they're facilitators of the transaction. So I think Australia's taking a view around scam protection that is a continuation of the sort of consumer protections that have been around across many other regulatory frameworks, including things like KYC, where there are quite strong examples of fines. And you're seeing already banks and others anticipating the implementation of that framework and going well above and beyond what they deem as the bare minimum, because they need to get their house in order. So that's great. The other interesting thing is that technology is now available to allow industry participants to have their cake and eat it too. They can share data while protecting privacy. They can share it at real time. They can execute AI at scale in a performant way, both machine learning AI as well as some of the more modern Gen AI techniques. They can track the lineage of money movements, of customer movements. They can do so for the right purpose, for the right cause. So I think the regulation is taking that into account and saying it's not prohibitively complex, as it might have been 10 years ago, to require industries to collaborate with each other. It's actually very much within the art of the possible.
That's a great point. Thank you. Some really strong points, and I think the common theme that I'm getting is that it's about making scam prevention a shared legislated responsibility, which I think is a key word here. So moving into detail, I am conscious of time because we're going to be very tight in this one, but getting into detail, Toby, I'll start with you. What has the implementation of the framework meant for the payments industry in practice?
Well, I think Mark said it well, where the legislation's passed and they're all preparing. The thing about the legislation and what we put in for the consultation is the codes don't necessarily mean you're in compliance with the principles. So you've still got to be compliant with those principles and build in, like as you would with an AML regime, build in like an anti-scam regime and have those policies in place. We have to remember also with the scam prevention framework, it is not a reimbursement framework, it is a prevention framework. However, consumers are liable for compensation if a regulated entity doesn't meet their obligations. So that's a lot's going to come down to the rules and codes. So we're working with Treasury, we're working with the NASC, we're working with all stakeholders to try to develop those underpinning rules, which are really important because it's all about consumers at the end of the day. So how, you spoke with the Singapore panel earlier, how do we have that shared redress if people aren't liable? What would that matrix look like? And learning from the UK model, they only had it to the first hop for money muling. We know there's multiple hops and it might go to crypto or might go cross border. So we need to take that into account as well. So we're considering all this, but then also working as, we hear a lot about data sharing, but what actual data do you want to share? And so we've been doing a lot with preliminary work, especially with our Financial Crimes Exchange Open Intelligence Loop by bringing all sectors on that. So we have, Metas on board, we have telcos, and we can actually sharing information. We have government. So we're looking at, we can do website takedowns, which is brilliant. We can share those phone numbers, and the telcos have been doing a lot of blocking. Meta can take down those pages, and we can share those critical insights and intelligence. But again, I'd say this probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the NASC forming. Like, we were in that zone where it was just an absolute blame game, everyone blaming each sector. But what we've also realised is we often refer to payments and banking at the end of the life cycle, but we're also realising in some ways we're at the start, because as we're becoming so good at blocking those high value account-to-account scams, we're seeing criminals go back to lower value goods and services not received scams, say on online marketplaces, but also back to card fraud. And what we're seeing is card fraud becoming a more important rail, but also for us, a challenge is now Australian cards used in overseas fraud on online channels. And when we're looking at those merchant codes, we go, hang on a sec, these are the enablers for scam compounds, whether it be digital advertising or telco services or IT services. And that's where a lot of our chargebacks are. So, so the conversation's maturing about what data we want to share, what actionable intelligence we want to share, and probably also learning from the AML regime. We don't want to copy that where the SARs or SMRs, we call them in Australia, just aren't sent off and not much action is actually done. Yeah. So we're trying to bring it down to really sort of practical sense to protect consumers and see real action to stop scams.
It's a big shift, but obviously there's clearly a lot of work still to navigate those challenges. I think one of the things that is quite encouraging is to see that these are being identified now. So there's a real appetite to make this work. I know you touched a little bit on the fact that banks and providers are starting to work together in new ways. Is there anything else you'd want to add to that, or has that summed up in terms of collaboration?
Look, it's a very close relationship. There's so many initiatives. Like, talk about the NASC, it's also important about who isn't collaborating with us. So whilst all the banks are working, and there's one vendor in the room, like we've had a lot of success with Buy-Catch Trust with account-to-account risk scoring. There's other vendors that offer other products, but also the crypto exchanges that wouldn't cooperate. That's probably been a significant lever that they'll blocked. We didn't get a lot of guidance around from the regulator about that, but that brave decision, and then also sharing what best practices are working and not. And that's something that we've really embraced, that sort of, we call it the Team Australia approach, but there's no competition in that space. So if you identify a new initiative, share it, because it's going to be another organisation that's going to do it the next day. But then moving that past our own sector and developing those close relationships with the crypto industry, with the telco industry, with the digital platforms, it's really important. And of course with law enforcement and government. So it's more than just our industry.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Let's move on to regulation, Jade. The National Anti-Scam Centre was designed to coordinate across multiple industries. What's changed in terms of accountability and information sharing since the framework came into effect?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to start this one by saying that while the legislation has passed, as Toby's stepped out, there's still a number of things to be put in place before it's effectively in effect.
Yes.
But I will say that from the point of view of the National Anti-Scam Centre, what we've seen really is, I think, industry in particular now having a clear understanding and a clear of the government's expectations around detection, prevention, disruption, responding and reporting. And what that means is that we've found, I think, an increase in momentum in terms of engagement and wanting to be involved in initiatives, both things that might be facilitated through organisations like the National Anti-Scam Centre or through other sorts of forums that we have in Australia as well. So I think that's really ramped up the desire of organisations to get involved and start to put in place the systems and controls that might not have been in place before. I think it's also made it some of those other sorts of sectors like Toby just talked about with cryptocurrency. We've certainly seen now cryptocurrency exchanges being involved in our fusion cells, setting up data sharing arrangements with the National Anti-Scam Centre, and I think putting us in a better position to link up those parts of the ecosystem. What it will look like in the future will be a mix of organisations that will be regulated under the framework, and then there may be others that we would also encourage to share data and information. We know that scammers are going to adapt, and I think what we're seeing is everybody kind of position themselves to be ready for the next big scam challenge that we'll have. I think it's the fact that the framework was announced and has in February has meant too that organisations, particularly banks, in our engagement with them, it's been easier for those people that are trying to get their boards and their governance systems to really support some of the initiatives they want to put in place. And so I think it's really signalled so that organisations will start to now invest in the very things that are needed to, fix this tricky problem. The fact that it's a whole of ecosystem model that the legislation reflects means that also that ability for organisations to then start to break down some of the barriers that have existed. And when we look at the legal barriers to data sharing, for example, everybody's got more willingness now to start to really test what actionable information they have and how they might share it. And so we see a number of mechanisms, I think, that exist. We've heard about the Global Signals Exchange here. Toby mentioned the Financial Crimes Exchange in Australia. The National Anti-Scam Centre is increasingly linking up with a lot of different reporting systems. So our law enforcement portal, we have reports. The more we can centralise and bring all this intelligence together, I think the better equipped organisations will be when that framework really fully hits us in the coming months or year. Thanks.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive response. I think what was good about that also is that you've touched on what some of the most effective mechanisms have been and ones that have been hardest to implement. So by all means, I think, the accountability seems to be the real driver here. So let's move on to technology. Mark, I'll bring you in here. Feedzai works with banks globally. How do you see Australia's framework shifting the way technology is being used in scam prevention?
We do work with folks globally, and the typologies do vary, the regulations vary, and we have products that help facilitate that, just like the banks share with each other. And banks have up-leveled their technology in general. Better data infrastructure, better AI infrastructure. I think if there was just one point I'd like to reinforce that could stick with people is, I know it's a cliche, but it's very true, is the bad guys aren't sitting still, and the regulation that's coming out in Australia and around the world, we have no idea what it's going to mean 3 years from now. I'm an engineer. I use Gen AI to code generate, all sorts of technology, and the orders of magnitude lower cost and effort necessary to build whatever scam you want to build. It is not just a little bit different. It's a completely new world. You want to set up an entirely fictitious website, generate an entirely new phone number, register a new business just to target Frank over here. Previously would have been completely uneconomic. Completely impractical. It's now 2, 3, 4 orders of magnitude cheaper to do that at scale. So I think, the whole industry is built around almost an implicit assumption that things around us are not changing that quickly. We're sharing typologies, we're setting up whack-a-mole interventions, one typology at a time, data sharing, we're looking at it 3 or 4 attributes for this particular use case. Let's get these 3 telcos on board. Let's get those 2 banks on board. It's way too slow. Now, that's not a very constructive comment because, you know, how can we all go a lot faster? But I think the meta problem is the interesting one here. I don't mean meta Facebook. I mean the meta problem of how do we establish systemic protections against these things that can dynamically adapt in response to the fraudsters who are the fastest adopters of new technology and new AI in history. And what better place to start than inside very tech-forward banks and telcos and others that have been using these technologies for good reasons for a long time. They have a lot of great ideas about how these things could evolve. But the point is there's going to have to be much more dynamic self-learning approaches to change rules and scores on the fly in order to mitigate and prevent before humans have even caught up. So that's my one main point is, beware the scammer who now has Anthropic and OpenAI and Gemini to generate things for them and generate deep fake images and generate videos and generate whatever for fractions of a cent.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, look, I think, and obviously that highlights the need for us to work closely together and sort of be one step ahead, right? I think what I get also out of that, with some of the things that you mentioned, is that it's good to sort of see that compliance is actually turning into a catalyst for innovation in terms of solutions as well. So that's very encouraging.
I think, just to pick up on that,
Yes.
and Jade was mentioning this earlier, it's this, the other thing that's happening in Australia is the collaboration around this stuff. It's creating a nice air cover for the industry to innovate in things they want to innovate in anyway,
Yes.
like data sharing and AI and so on, but it's saying this is that for good. It's not for things that might be more,
Correct, yeah. Brilliant. All right, well, let's move into future challenges. I'd like to get some shared perspectives from Jade and Toby on this one. Globally, anti-scam measures often move too slowly, which is what we've been talking about. So how can Australia balance the urgency of acting fast with the complexity of coordinating so many different industries?
I think we heard today that's a challenge for everyone. But I take a step back and I sort of look at the rollout of the digital economy. So whether it be telcos, digital platforms, and banking and payments, especially like with digital and banking and digital onboarding, where it was all from these product teams about fast and frictionless and worry about KYC and AML risk later. And we have, for all sectors, been retrofitting a range of security and safety measures to rebuild trust. And I think we're just realising over the last couple of years that this erosion of trust that has been caused across the digital economy has we haven't had the productivity gains we hoped for. And so with my colleague and I, we've been thinking about this for a good 12, 18 months, and we wrote a paper, we call it the Design Trinity. And it was looking at our industry and I guess the future threats of like agentic AI and payments and connecting and interlinking fast payment systems globally. And when we looked at it, we thought, well, as I guess the digital economy, we're well aware of privacy by design. We've thought a lot about security by design, like we heard it from the earlier panel in Singapore. We've been doing a lot in Australia, to stop account takeover and stronger onboarding. But we never really considered safety. And there's a lot of work out there about what safety by design is and what is service provider responsibility to make your product in the digital economy safe. And it's even, it's any product in the digital economy. So even government programs have been exploited by organised crimes as enablers for mule accounts and so forth. So I think that the lesson that we need to learn from this is we probably shouldn't have got to the point where we needed the scam prevention framework. I think it's probably quite disappointing. And so the challenge is now, I think, for any product team in the digital economy at all that has a nexus, they need to work with their risk teams to say, okay, this product we're going to develop, how is that going to be exploited potentially? How are you going to make it safe? And on the other side, if you left it to your risk teams, you'll probably never get your product released. Yes. So then, like you would in money laundering, have a risk assessment to think, okay, well, when criminals do find that vulnerability, whether it be online marketplace or digital platform or, as I said, digital onboarding, how are we going to respond to that? How are we going to respond to that in an efficient way so we can keep our customers safe, but also have trust in our product? And I think that's a lesson learned.
Absolutely.
Yeah, look, I think I'd add, I agree with the thinking more about the design of these products and services, but particularly, I think with the Australian model, one of the advantages it does have is it has built in some flexibility to adapt. And so whilst it is a complex model and it's going to take a little bit of time to be fully in place, I think it's important to recognise that it does build within it the ability to designate new sectors, to be a bit, to really be a bit more flexible than what most legislative frameworks would be. And so the actual design itself has considered that there will be future scam challenges that we don't know about today. There will be sectors that will be possibly, enablers of scams in the future, and that we're going to need to be ready to be able to adapt. I would also add that while in the absence of a framework or while we're waiting for a framework, there is nothing that stops businesses understanding what data is telling you, sharing data. We've invited organisations for the last couple of years to come to the NASC. We want to share data with you, and we would like to be able to utilise your data as well to help protect people. So there isn't, and there are ways to address some of the issues we see around privacy. We've been doing that absent any legal sort of scams framework over the last 2 years. So really encourage organisations to take steps quickly. You don't need to wait for a framework. You don't need to wait for regulations. You can, as we've talked about, innovate. You can start small and try and scale up. And I think we all have a responsibility to be doing that, not just waiting for that solution to come, not to wait for regulation. Like Toby said, some organisations might be disappointed that there are laws now that have come in. But you don't need to wait for those. And when they do come in, we shouldn't be just working towards a bare minimum either. We need to keep innovating. We need to keep lifting the bar. This is a big problem. The tools and technology that will help us, all of us in our daily lives, like AI, are going to be great, but they are also bringing significant threats, and we need to stay on top of them.
Yes, perfect. No, brilliant. Look, I think that definitely resonates, right? Policy definitely gives a framework, but it's, the theme here is that technology is the thing that makes it live and agile, right? So, Mark, I'll jump to you in that case then. As we know, scams move incredibly fast, often faster than regulation, as we're talking about here. So from your perspective, what role does technology then play in bridging that gap between policy intent and on-the-ground protection?
Well, I think the point is policy intent. The scam protection framework is a framework. It's not prescriptive about the exact mechanism for enforcement. It's like many great regulations, it's saying do the right thing, and we're not necessarily going to define what the right thing is down to the letter of the law. And so banks already know, and others know what that means. They have lots of teams of smart people saying, if only I could get all of the data and all of the modeling in all the same place and execute things and do highly customized transactional scoring to look at every payment and every customer onboarding and tailor to know what's their propensity to be a victim of scam typology A, B, C, D, and how we do that differently for somebody who might be an expert in some areas versus somebody who's a bit more vulnerable. I think that technology is an enabler like it's always been to know more about the customer and customize the interaction and do the right thing to protect them. I know that's, that's a motherhood and apple pie statement.
Yes.
And people invest in technology because they want to do the right thing for the customers. They want to build that brand for protecting their customers. They have a lot of commercial incentives independent of the regulation to do so. And the bad guys are out there trying to do the opposite. So it's an infinite game, to use the words of, I think it's Simon Sinek, the public
yes,
speaker.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Brilliant. No, thank you for that. Looking at the time, I think we'll move to sort of final thoughts here, team. So Jade, I'll start with you in terms of final word. What indicators, in your view, will show us that the framework is reducing scam losses? Will it be reported dollars saved, scams, incidents reported, or prosecutions?
Look, I think all of those things are metrics that you can apply and that would give some indication of whether it's working. But I think when I look at it, the one thing I've noticed over recent years and with the increasing scam threat, as well as other threats that exist, is the erosion in trust, and the erosion in trust of government, the erosion of trust in organisations and businesses. I think for me it would be seeing increased levels of trust again, both in the way that consumers engage with services. I think what I want to see in the future, and I think what will be a good test, is if someone like my elderly aunt no longer wants to go into a bank to do her banking and is happy to get an app and do her banking online. Like, I think if we can really build that trust again, for me, that will be a sign that it's working.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and I think what that also shows that this framework's about long-term systematic change, not quick wins. So yes, agree. Toby, what's the single most lesson from Australia's approach that the payment industry in other countries should carry forward?
I said before about our Trinity framework, so I think that's for industry, the number one. But the second one is, I guess, that each sector needs to do their part if we're going to see real change.
Yeah. Collaboration backed by accountability. Totally agree there as well. Thank you. Mark, last question for you. Looking ahead 2 to 3 years, what do you see as the biggest technological shift in the scam prevention, and where should financial institutions be investing today to stay ahead?
Data infrastructure.
Okay. Simple as that.
Simple as that.
Yes.
I mean, all of the great things that everybody wants to do involve some level of governed, safe, real-time controls around data sharing between institutions, within institutions, for not just reactive investigations of scams, but for preventative, real-time, consent-based, privacy-protected data sharing between institutions. Institutions are fairly well established nowadays in managing their internal data. They're getting better at pulling in external data. But as it relates to data moving across boundaries, whether it's across banks within a sector, across sectors, or across country boundaries, the world is really barely getting started. So data infrastructure is, I think, the one key thing, but I'm biased.
Perfect. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that is time. So, a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their valuable insights. Thank you all for joining us today. I think, what really comes true for me here is that tackling scams isn't just about one solution. It takes frameworks, technology, collaboration, and trust. Australia's journey shows that real progress is possible and offers some valuable lessons for others to consider. Thank you. We're now moving into the third panel, so we're jumping straight in. I'll hand over to Toby, who's actually the chair for that session. Thanks, mate. Do you want to follow the panelist, or should we just take this?
Thanks, Ken. Come up. Andrea, are you around? Oh, there she is. Well, you haven't heard enough of my voice, so you get a little bit more.
Not enough.
Not enough. So we've heard a bit about the double-edged sword of technology. So criminals exploit it to enable scams, but it is also our defence. And of course, vendors and technology is a critical part of that and a critical lever. So today we're going to dive into how technology builds safety and security to protect consumers and ensure trust in the digital economy. So it's my pleasure to moderate this panel. I'm joined by Andrea Leask, the Deputy CEO of NetSafe New Zealand, Mr. Ken Yon, Senior Director of Risk and Compliance for PayNet Malaysia, and Imran Sheikh, Director of Consumer Business Development and Strategy at Trend Micro. So thank you very much. So have we got a timer?
Yes.
30 minutes. Let's pause so we can take as much time as we want. Might have time for audience questions. So, Andrea, let's start with you. So we've heard a lot about data, and I think that's very important so we know what the insights are, what the vulnerabilities are, and what those threats that we must close. So to ensure data accuracy, what are the barriers for consumers in reporting, and how do we overcome all the challenges so we get data right?
Thanks, Toby. Make sure that's on. You able to turn my mic?
Maybe it's user error. Thanks, Toby. So research by NetSafe found that there's 3 most common reasons why people don't report scams. The first one is that it's too hard. 2, in particular, Kiwis don't know where to report. And number 3, there's a sense of shame and embarrassment attached to reporting scams. So in terms of the first one, that is that it's too hard to report, we've been working with UX designers and focus groups to redo our web forms to make them as easy as possible. And this was off the back of finding that we had 80,000 visitors to our reporting site, but only 26,000 of those converted into reports. So clearly there was a drop-off rate that we needed to address in our web forms. The other thing that we do is we offer channel of choice. So we've now got a chatbot, so people can report via our chatbot. They can use live chat, they can email us, they can text us, they can phone us, or they can submit a report on the web form. So it's just another way, by providing channel of choice, we're making it as easy as possible for people to report to us. Our helpline also offers extended hours. So we have people available for scam victims from 8 a.m. in the morning till 8 p.m. at night, Monday to Friday, and 9 till 5 on weekends as well. That works really well for young people because they're at school all day, and they're not in New Zealand, you're not allowed your phone at school, so we can't talk to them during the day. It also works for adults who might not be available during work hours. We offer an interpreter service for anyone whose English is a second language. And we've found that neurodiverse people in particular find texting much more comfortable, and they're more likely to engage with us. And so texting's much more popular. We also allow people to report on platform for Meta products, Instagram and Facebook. Sorry. The second barrier was that in New Zealand, people don't know where to report, and that's because our scams ecosystem in New Zealand is very fragmented. NetSafe is very lucky. We have a very high media profile, so we're pretty much on radio and in newspapers nearly every day, about 5 out of 7 days a week. And as a result, NetSafe has a 54% awareness score, and that compares to our competitors whose awareness score is on average 8%. The final and possibly the most challenging barrier to reporting is shame and embarrassment. Victims feel foolish, and so they're reluctant to talk to anybody about what's happened to them in case they're judged. We also, this is different to some of the countries in Asia, and particularly Singapore, there is quite high levels of distrust in government institutions. So to address these challenges, we offer non-judgmental service, and we train our staff to deliver that non-judgmental service. We use positive and encouraging language. We emphasise our commitment to privacy, and that we won't be sharing any information they give us with government and other agencies. And lastly, our campaigns are very much focused around the fact that anyone can be scammed. And that was evident this morning when Yuri talked about whether anyone had scanned the QR code. Anyone can be scammed. And I think by normalising reporting of scams and experience of scams, we can address that final barrier. Toby.
Thank you, that's great. It's really important to hear that customer-facing journey and the challenges they face. So, Ken, I'm really interested from our early discussion to hear from you now. So PayNet's Malaysia's payment infrastructure, and a challenge for our industry is, as we heard on the first panel, it's a fraction of 1% of all payments are a scam, right? So, and as we said, you know, victims are not identified and socially engineered in payments infrastructure. So what technology innovations are you using and thinking about to make your infrastructure safe and secure and to mitigate against scams?
Thank you, Toby, for the question. Maybe just before I go straight to the answer, just to explain PayNet Malaysia. We are the national payments infrastructure company, which means we don't deal directly with the end consumers like yourselves. Our main client are actually banks, and we fortunately we process the entire country's retail payments in one company. Now, we started this journey to fight scams sometime in 2021 during the COVID time, where the industry just requested us to, there's no innovation, just say, because we are the national payments operator, they say, can you help us house the mule database? Essentially, we have a mule database kept by the central bank, and they felt, the industry felt that it was very meaningful to share this with all the banks, especially when potentially these mules, assuming they are being caught by the bank, they jump from bank A to bank B or bank C and so on. So this was just a simple, well, won't say innovation, but just a role that PayNet played. But we had well, at least there was a push by the, right all the way the Parliament in 2022, and that was the beginning of our journey in setting up our own National Scam Response Center. And that we started off, fortunately, I guess, getting the right members in that first assembly of the various parties that is supposed to be involved in the National Scam Response Center, including PayNet. And PayNet, together with the industry, when we first started the National Scam Response Center, there were a lot of pain points. And we had 6 months of pain points to learn from. And back in 2023, April, we started the journey to build a national fraud portal. Now, this national fraud portal gave us the ability to get extremely good data directly from the industry, directly from the cases that the moment a victim reports in. So the accuracy of the data is very high. And 1 year plus after that, what's the innovation here is that the ability, not for the banks, but for the infrastructure company like PayNet, to see the network effects, the network analytics that will basically help complement what the banks cannot see today. The banks can only see who their customer is and so-called the recipient account number, and that's all. But we do have the knowledge of the recipient behavior as well. And that becomes very powerful when we want to complement the industry's fight against scams. And we are the one that provides the alerts. We will be able to see mail accounts that has basically slipped through the bank's detection, and we are able to then provide that input or alert to the industry for their necessary action. Now, that's just a little bit of what essentially in this, our National Fraud Portal, we have built this fraud kill chain capability, which essentially we are going to use data and machine learning and possibly AI to further enhance our coverage, possibly into other rails as well. We do have the e-commerce rails and as well as other payment rails, and essentially incorporating that into our basically analytics and to build models to fight scams. So I think just to share with you some of the developments in PayNet. This model, just for your information, is validated by BIS Innovation Hub. If you want, you can Google Project Hertha. Project Hertha talks about the benefits of incorporating the payment infrastructure company to complement the bank's activities in terms of fighting scams. And because of the wealth of data that passes through the payment operator, we also are able to perform fund tracing almost, I would say, quite seamlessly, and that we are able to then provide the information back to the industry, all on a single platform, and where all the industry players, including today, as of today, there are about 50 over players connected to this platform, collaborating as and when we speak, 24/7, and providing all the necessary action, and as well as, most importantly, we want to block the money from getting out of the banking system. So what essentially the banks does is the earmarked amount, and hopefully that amount could be returned back to the victim in faster period. Yeah.
Oh, Ken, that was brilliant. I wrote down so much there. I got accurate data leads to accurate insights. For every scam, there is money laundering, network effect over silos, the kill chain. I think what's important, improved funds tracing and repatriation, right? Tracing those funds and getting the money back. That's really insightful. Thank you. Imran, so Trend Micro has long been in the market to keep our digital economy and consumers safe from criminal threats, and I think it's often missed that we silo up economic crimes, and there's a nexus between fraud, scams, and cybersecurity. And as we've heard today, AI is the new threat, but it's also an opportunity to solve many challenges, and it's the buzzword of any conference or boardroom meeting these days. So it wouldn't be a panel without talking about it, and thank you for taking that short straw. So how's Trend Micro leveraging AI? What are you considering around the possibilities, and how do you envisage it will help your clients, banks, and consumers as a whole?
Great, thanks for the question, Toby. Yeah, look, at Trend Micro, we very much see, Trend Micro, we very much see scams, fraud, and cybersecurity as part of the same spectrum. And that's mainly because cyber criminals don't separate those things out, right? So they mix techniques such as, phishing, malware, social engineering, and now increasingly AI-driven impersonation. And, as you rightly said at the start, that even AI, like any other technology, is a double-edged sword. On the threat side, we see scammers use generative AI for phishing attacks at scale, creating fake websites, deepfake videos. But on the opportunity side, AI also actually gives us speed and accuracy in a way that is a game changer for cybersecurity. As I mentioned right at the start, Trend Micro has been around for about 35 odd years. So naturally, we tend to have one of the largest threat intelligence networks. And what AI is helping us do there is that it's helping us make our threat intelligence systems more efficient. It's analyzing the large amounts of data. We're able to detect and predict and block, emerging threats a lot quicker. We've been using machine learning for a while as well to spot anomalies in real time. What AI is doing in that space is helping us catch evolving threats like zero-day threats, again, much quicker. So definitely speed and accuracy are sort of the two key factors in our organization. And that benefits, not only the individuals, but our enterprise customers, including banks. Bringing it down to a consumer level, one example is our Trend Micro Scam Check app, which is sort of the focus of our booth, if you've popped by that today. That is an AI-powered solution, an app that is designed for the everyday consumer to be able to detect, and spot scams in real time. And why that's important for us is that, scams work through deception, as we all know. And the human element tends to be the most vulnerable or the weakest link in a lot of cases as far as cybercrime is concerned. So from our perspective, putting AI directly into the hands of the consumer doesn't just protect them, it actually empowers them and shifts them from that last line of defense to the first in many instances.
Yeah, and just quickly, so we heard on the first panel about, the operational side where there's this pressure from senior executives to put AI, it's no longer machine learning, it's generative or agentic AI. But what I'm hearing from a lot of our members in the banks is the challenge of connecting legacy systems. So from an industry standpoint, do you see that as a challenge that may hold back the real possibilities of AI?
Yeah, look, I think that's a very valid concern, and it is one that has been posed to us multiple times from business customers and partners. I think the important thing there to recognise is that adding AI to the mix isn't necessarily ripping out or replacing what's already there. The purpose of AI is to complement existing systems and drive improvement. So, in many cases, AI can be layered on top of existing infrastructure, and there are tools out there that can connect seamlessly to older environments, but a practical approach is also utilizing cloud-based AI services. So organizations can use APIs to connect to cloud-based AI services, thereby reaping the benefits of AI without having to rework their entire infrastructure. So, going back to that Scam Check solution as an example, we're working globally with some financial sector partners that are approaching it in two ways. So some are looking at embedding it directly into their apps and infrastructure, whereas others are actually exploring API models and being able to offer the solution to their subscribers or customers without having to touch their core banking application. So I think it's a valid concern, but I think at the end of it, it comes down to a blend of strategy, the right tools, and really having the mindset that we are utilizing AI for incremental improvements as far as infrastructure is concerned.
Yeah, I like that, incremental improvements. Not trying to boil the ocean, right?
That's it.
Yeah, that's good. Andrew, I want to come back to you. So today I've heard a lot about end user education and consumer awareness. And for me, a part of the rollout of the digital economy sort of changed where we had free-to-air television and radio, and I guess consumer campaigns were a lot easier in traditional media. But given what's happened with the digital economy and online, and so many sectors of the community are communicating on different channels, how do we get customer education and awareness right in the modern environment?
Got 4 tips for you, Toby. The 4 tips are, the first one is we don't try and do it all ourselves. So a good example of that is the company I work for is called NetSafe. We have set up Net Safety Week, which is a consumer awareness week. We don't think that we need to do it all ourselves, and so we partner with other organisations. So, for example, we partner with the AI Institute of Asia Pacific to deliver some research into AI-based scams. We did a webinar for youth where they could talk and gave them a voice about their online lives. And the third webinar we did was for young gamers, and we partnered with Esports New Zealand to do that. So my first tip would be, don't try and do it all yourself. The second one is we're very privileged to receive a lot of expertise pro bono because we're a charity, we're not part of government, and we're a civil society organisation. The third tip is we consistently deliver bold and innovative campaigns that really press the boundaries of what's acceptable. And I have to say, some of our campaigns would not be appropriate in the Singapore environment. But again, because we're not part of government, we do have an opportunity to push it quite a bit. And a recent example of that was a campaign we ran at the beginning of the university year called Spicy Nudes. And we did a pop-up tent. It was during orientation week, which is the first week of university. Typically, it's a very drunken affair. And we were giving out noodles, which is a staple of university student diets. And they had the opportunity to go in the draw to win a year's worth of noodles. But what it did was it gave us the opportunity to talk to these young people about sharing nudes and the risks that might be involved in sharing nudes. Now, I get it, you can't do that in every country and every place, but it was a really effective campaign. And we reached 1.3 million New Zealanders, which is more than 1/5 of our population. The last thing I'll say is we've got a hugely talented team, and that enables us to deliver a great deal more than our balance sheet or team size would indicate is possible. Thanks, Toby.
Thanks. And thanks for sharing probably one of the most conservative ones of your campaigns. But a strength in New Zealand is your sense of humour. And I know a lot of yours have cut through, and I dare anyone to go and YouTube what some of those campaigns are. They're hilarious. So, Kennedy, Imran, we've got to close up. So I just ask you to be brief, but I think Mark mentioned it, touched on this earlier. We're looking at sharing of data, and we've talked about that network effect. And unfortunately, the way not only the digital economy has been established, but often in the payments and banking industry, it's been quite siloed. And does there need to be a conversation about not only sharing data, features, and signals between vendors domestically, but also internationally to improve security risk scores? And what would be the challenges of overcoming that? And probably lastly on this triple question, that when we talk about sharing data, which has said a lot today, what actually do we want to share?
Okay, definitely we want to share data, but it is not raw data that we're talking about. It should be derived data that is useful for risk profiling and assessments. basically including mail accounts, suspicious mail account activities, perhaps scam phone numbers, and so on. The challenges are that, well, it's very obvious. I think we talked about privacy and data protection laws that's in place. That's probably the number one, but that's probably not the domain of most of the private institutions. This is really the government coming into looking into this, or it's probably working out a G2G framework. At the same time, I would say trust and governance is also probably the most important challenge that you need to overcome, in the sense that you need to build trust for all the bank's participants to trust us so that we don't misuse the data, and strictly the data should be controlled just for the purpose of fighting scams. And thirdly, I think the challenges is probably on the technical side, the technical interoperability, where the data schema, data formats of, if you want to exchange data, is inevitably is always going to be a challenge because it's going to be non-standard. So I would really recommend that I think in terms of overcoming this, a law, probably if you can, a regional or even a global law, but that's probably impossible. But at least there is a willingness to come up with a law that is can be adopted by more countries where we can share data. It's probably in the G2G domain in that sense, and also building the trust and governance framework that comes along to in using this data and being very transparent to the owners of those data, that we are not misusing those information, and also coming out with the standards. As I say, especially on cross-border, today there is hardly any cross-border P2P standards and payment standards that is around. And most of the time, countries struggle to connect to each other because there is no standard out there. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's right. Imran.
Yeah, look, I have to agree with, I think, everything that Ken's touched on, right? So the main challenges are definitely privacy and standardization, and the need for a common format to be able to share across different sectors. The other bit from our cybersecurity industry would definitely be one around security. Traditionally, we've always been very cautious about data sharing, because the more connected platforms and sectors you have, there's more opportunities for attackers to exploit gaps. So we do now obviously see a need that we need to be a bit more collaborative, and there is a need to sort of share useful data, as Ken puts it, right? I think in terms of the benefits, if we can get this right, there is, I think, a significant benefit in the form of a real shift towards early intervention, right? And it also helps with something that was raised in the first panel, and actually something that we're also seeing increasingly in our field, which are cross-channel attacks, right? For instance, the scam that originates on social media, jumps to SMS and finalizes over a phone call, that definitely requires connected intelligence, not siloed tools. So yes.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, we're over time, Robert, so I might hand back to you for closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, panel. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. I think, as Toby says, time is up. So we hope you found the panel informative. And it's a coffee break now, as I understand it. And then, yeah, we'll carry on with the sessions after that. Thank you very much for joining our panel.